The name is Zarvarg, and at the time I was ordered to watch the humans in battle. My body hadn't even reached full maturity yet. The size of the white horns that marked me as an adult male so pitifully small that the other adults saw me more as an errand boy rather than one of their own. Perhaps this was the very reason why I was selected for the risk-free mission. Perhaps this was why they thought it was a good idea that no one other than me would be sent to planet Zotrar to collect intel on the humans' fighting doctrines. Perhaps it was all just a cultural misunderstanding, and no one knew what sort of warfare I was about to witness. Or perhaps I dared to entertain in my thoughts. They knew about the brutality of human battles all along, and they thought that the psyche of a young me was a better sacrifice than that of their own. But that's not something I can ever prove or be sure of. What I can be sure of, however, is that watching the humans fight has changed me forever. And the story you are about to hear has influenced every single decision I've made since, turning the young fool I was into the adult I am today. A story that forged that naive Zarvarg into the most powerful president of planet Zethar. But let me start from the beginning of that transformation. From the moment I found myself in one of humanity's most insane inventions, the drop pod. I still remember every detail of that day, 40 cycles ago, when my soft scales and softer judgment had led me into that metal coffin. You modern Zetharians, with your comfortable shuttles and gravity cushions, cannot imagine the sheer audacity of human military transport. They take a metal capsule barely larger than a storage unit, stuff it with soldiers, strap some heat shields to it, and fire it at a planet like ammunition. They call this rapid deployment. Any sane species would call it voluntary meteor simulation. The truly mad part? Even now, in these modern times when humans have mastered faster-than-light travel, they still insist that turning soldiers into kinetic projectiles is perfectly reasonable. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, they say. Here's what I say. If your deployment strategy involves becoming a falling star, perhaps reconsider. Yet, there I was, young Zarvarg, strapped into one of these death traps, my tail folded 3 times just to fit. The red emergency lights turned everything crimson, including the 3 humans packed in with me. 3 soldiers who'd been ordered to let me observe their mission to liberate planet Zotrar from the Gorathi invasion. The Gorathi. Even now, that name makes my scales tighten. They were the scourge of the outer systems, a species that had long ago replaced their falling bodies with mechanical exoskeletons, their green flesh visible only through the joints of their armor. They conquered worlds not for resources or territory, but for the sick pleasure of harvesting neural tissue from sentient species. Planet Zotrar's native inhabitants, the peaceful Zotrani, were their latest victims. The Galactic Council had debated for cycles about intervention. The humans had deployed in days. 2 minutes to impact, announced Nick Harrison, the squad leader sitting across from me. He was checking his light weapons. Light for humans, though his rifle alone weighed more than my entire ceremonial outfit. Nick was enlarged by human standards, maybe 180 of their centimeters, lean and coiled like a spring. Sharp features, close-cropped brown hair, and eyes that never stopped calculating. There was an aura around him that suggested violence was just physics to him. Force, velocity, angles of attack, nothing more. To his left sat Alex Volkov, a glacier of a man whose hair so pale it was actually white, not the pinkish beige skin color that humans inexplicably call white. I still find it amusing that my pearl white scales are more literary white than these white humans, but I digress. Scars mapped his face like battle history, the most prominent running from his left eyebrow to his jaw. He cradled a rifle longer than I was tall, what they called a sniper rifle. He hadn't spoke once since we'd boarded. And then there was Django Okonkwo. Ancestors preserve me, Django Okonkwo. Over 2 meters of dark-skinned human fortress, carrying enough ammunition to supply his Athorian outpost. His heavy weapon, which he had named Betsy because, of course, humans name their instruments of death, was strapped to his back. He caught me staring and grinned. "First drop, little gecko." His bass voice somehow conveyed a hint of amusement despite our situation. Little gecko. If only he knew how close to accurate that was. We Zathorians are indeed reptilian, though we prefer scale-blessed. My own scales were still translucent white of youth, my horns merely pitiful nubs that barely extended past my skull. Where humans had hair, I had a ridge of flexible scales running from my forehead to neck. My vertical pupils kept dilating in the pod's light. I was 2/3 Nick's height and probably half his weight, Tell excluded. "Observer Varg is here at Joint Command's request," Nick said without looking up. "He observes, we fight, we complete the mission. Assuming the Garathi don't turn us into neural paste as soon as we land." Alex finally spoke, his Russian accent thick. "Well, they have to catch us first," Django laughed. The pod shuddered violently. We were entering atmosphere. My stomach tried to escape through my throat while the humans continued talking as if we weren't plummeting toward a battlefield. "Remember," Nick said, "the Garathi have fortified the eastern approach to the Zotrani sanctuary cities. We punch through their lines, link up with 2nd and 3rd Squad at Point Bravo, then push the main shield generators. Every minute we waste, more Zotrani die." The casual way he said it, more Zotrani die, while checking his grenades, made my scales crawl. But perhaps that was the point. The humans weren't here for glory or conquest. They were here because beings needed saving, and humans, insane as they were, had answered the call. 30 seconds! The pod's screaming intensified, metal groaned. I could hear air shrieking past us like vengeful spirits. Django started humming, actually humming, what sounded like a lullaby. 10 seconds! I squeezed my eyes shut and prayed to every ancestor I could name. The impact was indescribable. We hit Zotrar's surface like the universe's angriest fist. Only the inertial dampeners and crash foam saved us from becoming paste. Every organ in my body felt rearranged. The pod doors exploded outward, and I mean literally exploded because humans put bombs on everything, and before the smoke cleared, they were moving. What I saw when I stumbled out made me freeze in primal terror. The Garathi were everywhere. Imagine a creature that once might have been beautiful, green skin, that probably once were peaceful creatures in their home world, now encased in mechanical horror. Their exoskeletons were patchwork nightmares of stolen technology, 8 feet tall with weapons grafted directly onto their arms. Their faces were the worst part. Green flesh stretched over skulls too large for their original bodies. Eyes that glowed sickly yellow from cybernetic implants. Mouths that had too many teeth and drooled the nutrient paste that kept their failing organs functional. They moved wrong too, jerky and insect-like, their mechanical legs carrying them in shuddering bursts of speed. When they spoke, it was through vocabulators that turned their voices into metallic screams. And there were dozens of them, their weapons already firing streams of plasma that turned the ground to glass. This is when I learned how humans really fight. Nick didn't just shoot. He basically danced through plasma fire like it was rain, using anything as cover, firing his rifle with one hand while throwing grenades with the other. He put 3 rounds through a Garathi's faceplate, rolled behind debris as return fire melted the ground where he'd been, then popped up 20 feet away to kill 2 more. The Garathi's mechanical bodies made them strong, but slow. Nick was neither. Django had become something from primitive nightmares. A walking fortress of destruction. His heavy weapon roared continuously as plasma bolts sparked off his armor. A Garathi tried to flank him, his mechanical legs carrying it in that stuttering charge. Django grabbed its exoskeleton arm, ripped it off with a sound like tearing metal, then beat the creature to death with its own limb. He never stopped advancing.
Observer! Move!
Nick's voice crackled through my comm unit. A Garathi rushed toward me, its mechanical legs eating up ground in those horrible, jerking strides. Its face, ancestors, its face was splitting open, too many teeth gnashing as it raised its plasma cannon toward me. I couldn't move, couldn't think. The Garathi's head exploded in green mist and sparking electronics. Somewhere distant, I heard the crack of Alex's rifle.
I said move!
Nick grabbed one of my horns, the indignity, and dragged me behind cover as plasma fire turned the air where I'd been into superheated death. The next several minutes were a blur of horror and impossible human violence. The Garathi fought with the desperate fury of a species that had nothing left to lose, their mechanical bodies allowing them to take damage that would kill most organic beings. I saw one continue firing even after Django had blown off half its torso. Green flesh, mechanical parts scattered across the battlefield. But the humans fought like their ancestors must have fought the predators of their death world Earth. They used the Gorathi's mechanical predictability against them, exploiting the half-second delay between thought and mechanical action. They targeted joints where green flesh met metal, weak points in the exoskeleton design. Path clear for 30 meters. Alex's voice cold as Ochar's polar winds. I never saw him, just heard his rifle speak and watched Garathi die in sequence. Nick dragged me forward through a nightmare of green flesh and sparking machinery. We passed a dying Garathi, its mechanical legs still moving, green fluid leaking from its ruined face as it tried to speak through its broken vocabulator. The sound it made will haunt me forever. Part machine error, part organic agony. Why? I gasped between breaths. Why are you killing them this way?
Because someone has to,
Django answered, reloading Betsy.
The Zotrani can't fight these things, your people won't. That leaves us.
A massive Garathi in heavier armor appeared, commander class from the look of its more sophisticated exoskeleton. It stood 9 feet tall, 4 arms, 2 original, 2 grafted, each carrying a different weapon. It spoke in that metallic scream.
Humans, you should have stayed on Earth. Now your neural tissue will feed our continuation.
No thank you, Nick replied, and all 3 humans moved at once. What followed was 20 seconds of violence so intense I can barely process it even now. Django drew its fire, his armor taking hits that would have vaporized me. Nick flanked right, targeting the joints where its extra arms connected. Alex's rifle spoke 4 times, each shot destroying a weapon system. The commander charged Django with surprising speed for something so large. Django met it head on, actually grappling with a being that outweighed him in mechanical armor. They crashed through a ruined wall, Django somehow turning the creature's own momentum against it. Nick was there in an instant, his combat knife, a knife, finding the gap where the creature's helmet met his chest plate. Green blood sprayed as he severed something vital. The commander's scream through its vocabulator could have shattered glass. It died, badly, all 4 arms flailing as its mechanical systems failed one by one. Green flesh visible through gaps in its armor, twitching in final, horrible spasms.
Yeah.
Point Bravo, 100 meters, Nick announced, not even breathing hard. Those last 100 meters were filled with desperate Garathi trying to stop us from reaching the other human squads. They knew what it meant. Humans establishing a foothold meant the beginning of their end on this world. I saw horrors in those 100 meters. Garathi using the corpses of their own as shields, their mechanical parts still sparking. Zotrani civilians who hadn't made it to the sanctuary cities, their bodies bearing the horrific marks of neural extraction. And through it all, the 3 humans dragged me forward, completing their mission, because that's what humans do. When we finally reached Point Bravo, where other human squads had established a defensive position, I collapsed. My legs simply gave out. Around us, the remains of at least 40 Gorothi made the ground a graveyard of green flesh and twisted metal.
First squad plus observer reporting.
Nick announced to other humans.
About time,
Someone responded.
the Gorothi are massing for a counterattack. Hope you save some ammunition. Django used a Gorothi arm as a club for half the fight.
Nick replied.
It worked.
Django shrugged, checking Betsy with the care one might show a pet. They laughed. They actually laughed, surrounded by the corpses of nightmares, knowing more were coming. The Zatrani Sanctuary City is 12 kilometers west. A squad leader explained to me, perhaps noticing my shocked state. 40,000 civilians, mostly young and elderly. The Gorothi will harvest them all if we don't hold here and push forward to take out their shield generators. That's when it truly hit me. This brutality wasn't about conquest or resources. The humans were standing between monsters and innocents. Not that it made it any easier to witness all the violence. You're all insane, I whispered. Probably, Alex agreed, checking his rifle scope. But we're the right kind of insane for this work. Looking back now, 40 cycles later, I understand what he meant. The humans didn't fight like my people. With careful planning and minimal risk, they fought like beings who understood that sometimes the only thing standing between evil and innocence is someone willing to become something worse than evil itself. That day at Point Bravo, covered in green blood and mechanical oil, listening to the Gorothi regroup for another assault, while the humans calmly prepared to meet them, I began to understand what I was really there to observe. Not just human tactics, but human nature itself. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what came next. The 5-kilometer journey to the shield generators. Even now, 40 cycles later, I sometimes wake with my scales tight, remembering what I witnessed on that march through hell. The humans call it a hot extract under fire. I call it the time I learned the true meaning of terror and why humans shouldn't be allowed to name things. I should have known something was wrong when Nick, Django, and Alex tried to argue with their commanding officers about leaving me behind at Point Bravo. Sir, with all due respect, Nick was saying to a human whose rank insignia I recognized as Major, but whose name I'd never caught. The Observer has seen enough. He's documented our initial assault tactics. There's no tactical benefit to dragging him through a frontal assault on fortified positions. The Major, a woman with gray streaking through her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much, shook her head. Negative, Sergeant. The Zatharians pay good money for this observation opportunity. They get the full show.
Ma'am,
Django tried.
Gecko is not equipped for this. He doesn't even have proper armor.
And maybe his people should have thought of that before demanding complete tactical immersion. Another officer chimed in, a colonel whose scarred face suggested he had earned his rank the hard way. The Zatharian High Command paid 1 trillion credits for this observer program. They want to understand human warfare. They get to understand all of it. Alex, in the longest speech I'd heard from him yet, said, "You'll be a liability. We'll spend more time protecting them than completing the mission." "Then you better complete the mission fast," the Major replied, ending the discussion. Looking back, I find it amusing that I desperately wanted them to win that argument. Young Zarvarg would have gladly stayed at Point Bravo, documenting the defensive positions from a safe distance. But the humans had made a deal with my people. And if there's one thing I learned about humans that day, is that they honor their agreements, even the stupid ones. 20 minutes later, I found myself part of a 30-human assault force, wearing borrowed armor that didn't fit my reptilian frame and carrying medical supplies since I couldn't be trusted with weapons. The plan, as explained by the Major, was simple. Move 5 kilometers through Gorothi-controlled territory, disable the shield generators protecting their main base, and allow the fleet in orbit to end this invasion from above. Simple, as I'd learned, was human speak for catastrophically dangerous. The first kilometer was actually done in stealth, if you can call 30 humans moving through ruins stealthy. We moved in something they called bounding overwatch, which basically meant half of them pointed guns at things while the other half ran to new positions. I scurried along in the middle, trying not to let my tail drag noisily across the debris. The Garathi architecture we passed through was nightmarish. Organic structures that had been mechanically modified, like everything else they touched. Django muttered something about it reminding him of that movie with the aliens, which got nervous chuckles from the other humans. It was at the 1.5-kilometer mark that stealth went, as Nick so eloquently put it later, tits up. The ambush was perfectly executed. The Garathi had been waiting, their mechanical bodies allowing them to remain motionless for hours, hidden among the twisted architecture. The first we knew of it was when a private simply ceased to exist, replaced by a cloud of superheated plasma. Then, the world exploded. Plasma fire came from every direction. The ground erupted as buried Garathi burst from hiding. The metallic screaming filled the air as dozens of vocabulators announced our impending harvest. I froze completely, my reptilian brain overwhelmed by the sheer chaos.
Tree!
Nick shouted, physically lifting me and sprinting toward what I can only describe as Zotrar's attempt at creating a nightmare. It was a hollow tree, or what had once been a tree before the Garathi's terraforming weapons had turned it into something else. The trunk was easily 3 meters wide, with an opening just large enough for someone my size. Django and Alex provided covering fire as Nick literally stuffed me into the hollow. "Stay here. Don't move. Don't make a sound," he ordered, then turned and rejoined the battle without another word. What followed were the longest 20 minutes of my life. Inside that hollow tree, I experienced panic in its purest form. Space was cramped. I had to keep my tail wrapped around myself, my head ducked low. The walls were some kind of mutated wood that felt warm and slightly moist, like being inside something's throat. Light filtered through the cracks, giving me glimpses of the hell outside. The sounds were the worst. Plasma fires sizzling past, the meaty thud of bullets hitting flesh, screaming, human voices shouting orders, warnings, profanities in a dozen Earth languages. And underneath it all, a sound I'll never forget. The wet, tearing noise of violence up close. Through a crack, I saw something that still features in my nightmares. A human soldier, I never learned his name, had run out of ammunition. A Garathi was bearing down on him, all 8 feet of mechanical horror. The human threw a smoke grenade, not at the Garathi, but at its own feet. Then he disappeared into the cloud. What emerged from that smoke wasn't human anymore. It was humanity's ancestral predator instinct given form. The soldier had somehow gotten on the Garathi's back, his bare hands, finding the gap where the creature's helmet met its shoulders. And he pulled. The sound of green flesh tearing, of mechanical systems failing as biological components were ripped free. I watched him literally tear the Garathi's head from its body, with nothing but leverage and rage. The severed head hit the ground near my tree, vocabulator still trying to scream through ruined speakers, yellow eyes dimming as the neural tissue died. I nearly wet myself. Actually, no, I did wet myself. Just a little. Don't judge me. You weren't there. The battle raged on. My hiding spot, which had seemed like safety, became a prison of terror. Every plasma bolt that hit the tree made it shudder. Then a Garathi spotted me. I saw it through the crack, one of the smaller ones, maybe 7 feet tall, its mechanical legs carrying it toward my tree with that horrible stuttering gait. Its plasma cannon was charging, green energy building at the barrel's tip. No, I whimpered, pressing myself against the back of the hollow. The tree exploded. Not completely, just the front half vaporized by plasma fire. I was suddenly exposed, on my knees in what remained of my shelter, staring at the Garathi as it recharged for a killing shot. Its face split into too wide of a grin, mechanical jaw unhinging to show rows of teeth that had no business being in any mouth.
Young neural tissue.
Its vocabulator screeched.
Excellent harvest.
The Garathi's head disappeared in a red mist. Django stood behind where it had been, holding what looked like a primitive earth weapon. A shotgun, I learned later. "No one hurts our gecko," he said as casually as if he had swatted an insect. Nick and Alex appeared from different directions, their weapons creating a protective circle around me.
I thought we told you to stay hidden,
Nick said, pulling me to my feet.
"The tree exploded!"
I protested, my voice embarrassingly high-pitched. "Trees do that in war," Alex observed, which might have been his attempt at humor. The battle was winding down, but winding down in human terms meant only shooting at things occasionally instead of constantly. I found myself on my knees again, trembling uncontrollably, my scales flickering between white and a sick green color, a fear response I didn't even know I had. When the shooting finally stopped, I looked around and nearly vomited again. The battlefield was... Ancestors help me. I don't have words. Gorathi bodies, parts of Gorathi bodies were everywhere. Green flesh mixed with mechanical components created a carpet of horror. Some were still moving, things firing randomly in death. Heads separated from bodies, limbs scattered like a violent child's toy. One Gorathi had been cut completely in half, its mechanical legs still standing while its torso lay 10 feet away. The humans had lost people too. 5 empty sets of armor that had once contained soldiers, but the Gorathi, they had to be 60, 70 corpses, maybe more. It was hard to count when some of them were in so many pieces. "You okay, little gecko?" Django asked. I laughed. It was a horrible sound, half hysteria, half disbelief. "Okay, I just hid in a tree while you turned living beings into abstract art." "Hey," Nick said, kneeling down to my level. "You survived. That's what matters." "I didn't do anything. I just hid and panicked and..." I gestured at the wet spot on my armor. "You observed," Alex said simply. "That was your mission." They were trying to cheer me up, I realized. These insane, violent, impossible humans were trying to make me feel better about being a coward. "You should have abandoned the observation role," Nick said more seriously. "Found better cover, maybe grabbed a weapon. Hiding only works if you're actually hidden." "I don't know how to use weapons." "Then we'll teach you," he said simply. "Can't have our gecko getting harvested." That's when I realized they'd adopted me. Not officially, but in that way humans adopt anything they decide needs protecting. I was their gecko now. They ended up carrying me the last 3 kilometers, not because I was injured, but because my legs simply wouldn't work properly. Django threw me over his shoulder like a sack of grain, my tail dragging behind us, while Nick and Alex cleared the path ahead. We encountered 2 more Gorathi patrols. I watched from my undignified position as the humans eliminated them with the casual way of exterminators dealing with pests. No hesitation, no mercy, just swift and brutal violence. When we finally reached the shield generator complex, I was a different being than the one who'd entered that drop pod. I'd seen humanity without its mask of civilization. Witnessed the primitive core that allowed them to thrive on a death world and spread across the galaxy. They weren't simply soldiers. They were apex predators who'd learned to use tools. The destruction of the shield generators was almost anticlimactic. The humans planted their explosives while I documented everything with shaking claws. We were 2 kilometers away when the generators exploded, a pillar of green fire reaching toward the sky. Within minutes, kinetic strikes from orbit began raining down on Gorathi positions. The invasion was over, but my education was just beginning. Over the next month, as I continued my observation mission, something changed in me. The humans, particularly Nick's squad, took it upon themselves to toughen up the gecko. By the 2nd week, I was carrying a sidearm. A small one by human standards, but it felt like carrying a portable cannon. By the 3rd week, I'd actually fired it at a Gorathi scout that got too close to our position. I didn't hide in trees anymore. By the end of my observation period, I'd participated in 6 more combat operations, minor ones, mostly cleanup operations as the Gorathi retreated from Zotrar. But I was there, fighting alongside the humans, learning their controlled chaos. The Zarvarg who returned to Zethar was not the same young fool who had left. I'd gained something from the humans, not their full capacity for violence. Ancestors know I could never match that, but a fragment of it, a tiny piece of their resilience, their casual relationship with danger, and yes, their insanity. Which brings me to how I became president. You have to understand, Zathorian politics before my return were civilized. Debates were held in climate-controlled chambers. Disagreements were settled through lengthy deliberations. The most aggressive thing that ever happened was someone raising their voice slightly above conversational level. Then I came back for my observation mission. My first political debate was against Councillor Varming, who'd held his seat for 60 cycles and was considered unbeatable. He was explaining his 40-point plan for gradual economic reform when I stood up and said, "That's the stupidest thing I've heard since Django suggested we walk it off after a plasma burn." The silence in the chamber was deafening. "Your plan," I continued, channeling my inner Nick Harrison, "assumes our enemies will wait patiently while we deliberate. I've seen what real enemies do. They don't wait. They harvest your neural tissue while you're still forming committees." Varming tried to respond with traditional rhetorical flourishes. I responded by describing in vivid detail what Gorathi neural extraction looked like. Half the chamber fainted. The other half voted for my economic defense proposal. The assassination attempt came 2 years later. 3 Zatharians from the old guard, unhappy with my aggressive policies, cornered me in my private chambers. They had traditional honor blades, confident that a young politician would be easy prey. They didn't expect me to laugh. "You're gonna kill me with those?" I asked, remembering Django ripping a Gorathi's arm off. "Those tiny knives." When security arrived, they found the 3 assassins tied up with their own ceremonial sashes, one of them crying, all of them refusing to say what I'd done to subdue them. I'd simply described in detail what humans did to enemies who threatened their squad mates. The story spread. Suddenly, I wasn't just a politician. I was the Zatharian who'd fought alongside humans and lived, who'd seen real combat and come back changed, who allegedly could kill with his bare claws, a vast exaggeration. I'd simply learned from Alex that reputation was sometimes better than reality. When the presidential election came, my opponent tried to paint me as dangerously unstable, influenced by primitive human violence. I agreed with him. "Yes," I said during the final debate, "I've been influenced by humans. I've learned that sometimes when faced with monsters who want to harvest your people's brains, the appropriate response isn't dialogue. It's overwhelming firepower. I've learned that civilization is something we maintain not through weakness, but through the strength to defend it. And yes, I've learned that sometimes the craziest solution is the only sane one." Then I told them about the tree, about hiding in terror while humans fought to protect not just me, but 40,000 Zatrani civilians they'd never met, about watching Django carry me 3 kilometers because my legs wouldn't work, about Nick teaching me to shoot, not because it was his job, but because he didn't want their gecko to die. The humans are insane, I concluded, but they're the kind of insane that stands between innocent people and monsters. They're the kind of insane that honors their agreements even when it would be easier not to. They're the kind of insane that adopts scared observers and carries them to safety. If being influenced by that makes me dangerous, then yes, I am dangerous. dangerously committed to protecting our people. I won by the largest margin in Zatharian history. So here I sit, 40 cycles later, the longest-serving president our world has ever known. My political opponents call me the human sympathizer, as if it's an insult. My allies call me the warrior president, which is hilarious considering I spent most of my combat time either hiding, panicking, or being carried. But I did learn something in that tree, something beyond fear. I learned that civilization isn't maintained by those who huddle in safety. It's maintained by those willing to stand between the darkness and the light, even if they're absolutely terrified while doing it. The humans have a saying: courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action in spite of fear. I prefer Django's version. Everyone's brave until someone starts shooting. Real courage is not pissing yourself too much when they do. I only pissed myself that one time, by the way. Okay, twice. The point is, I survived. More than that, I learned, and in learning, I became something my people needed. A leader who understood that sometimes, when the Gorathi come calling, when the darkness threatens to harvest everything you hold dear, what you need isn't another committee. What you need is someone who's seen humans fight, who's witnessed their glorious insanity, and who's gained just enough of their madness to stand up and say, "Not today." Even if that someone is still, deep down, just a scared gecko who really wishes trees didn't explode. But that's the thing about courage. The thing the humans taught me. It's not about not being scared. It's about being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway, even if you wet yourself just a little.